My name is Ryan, and at 30 years old, I thought I had my life figured out. After years of hard work, I finally bought my dream condo in the city. Then my parents dropped a bomb. My sister Megan deserved my place, because she was building a family while I was just a single man who may never have kids. Their entitlement left me speechless, but not actionless. What happened next led to courtroom drama nobody expected. Before I dive into this wild ride, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories about standing your ground when family crosses the line. Growing up, I always knew my place in the family hierarchy. My sister Megan came into the world 3 years after me, and from that moment the dynamic was set. She was the baby girl who could do no wrong, while I was expected to be the responsible one who would eventually take care of himself. This pattern started early with simple things. When we were kids, Megan would break something, and I would get scolded for not watching her carefully enough. During birthdays, my parents would make a huge production for her celebrations, while mine were always more subdued. I am not saying I had a terrible childhood, just that the favoritism was obvious to everyone except my parents. Despite this imbalance, I focused on building my own path. I worked hard in school, maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, and eventually earned a scholarship to Cornell University. My parents attended my high school graduation, but spent most of the ceremony talking about how Megan would soon be starting her senior year. Even my achievement felt like it was somehow about her. College was liberating. For the first time, I was judged solely on my own merits, not in comparison to my sister. I double majored in computer science and business, worked part-time at the university tech department, and completed 3 internships at major tech companies. By the time I graduated, I had multiple job offers on the table. I chose a position at Vertex Technologies in Boston that offered an excellent salary and growth potential. My starting salary was $80,000 a year, which was substantial for a new graduate. Instead of splurging on luxuries, I lived frugally. I rented a modest apartment with a roommate, brought lunch from home, and put nearly 40% of my income into savings and investments. While my peers were buying new cars and taking exotic vacations, I had my eyes on a bigger prize. By the time I turned 28, after 6 years of disciplined saving and 2 significant promotions, I had accumulated enough for a substantial down payment on a property. The real estate market in Boston is notoriously expensive, but I had saved over $150,000 through sheer determination. After months of searching, I found the perfect place, a 2-bedroom condo in a renovated historic building in Back Bay. The property had 16-foot ceilings exposed, brick walls, hardwood floors throughout, and floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light. The location was ideal, just 2 blocks from the public garden, and within walking distance to my office. At $825,000, it stretched my budget to the absolute limit, but the investment potential was undeniable. The day I signed those closing papers was the proudest moment of my life. Nobody had handed me anything. Every dollar came from my own hard work and sacrifice. The condo represented not just a place to live, but tangible proof that I could achieve my goals independently. My best friend Travis was the first person I invited over after moving in. We had met during my first year at Vertex and bonded over our shared love of rock climbing and craft beer. Unlike many friends who drifted apart after college, our friendship deepened through our 20s. "This place is insane," Ryan Travis said, whistling as he walked through the open-concept living area. "Remember that shoebox apartment we shared when you first moved to Boston? What a difference 6 years makes." I laughed, remembering the tiny 1-bedroom apartment we had somehow managed to convert into a 2-bedroom by putting up a flimsy divider from cardboard walls to exposed brick. Definitely an upgrade. "You earned this," Travis said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Not many people our age can say they own a place like this, especially in this neighborhood." When I finally invited my parents to see the condo, their reaction was underwhelming. My father glanced around and commented on the unnecessary expense of the hardwood floors. My mother wondered aloud why I needed so much space for just one person. Neither of them explicitly congratulated me. "Megan and Bradley are still saving for their first place," my mother mentioned. Within minutes of arriving, as if my achievement somehow highlighted my sister's lack of similar success. I should mention that by this point, Megan had married her college boyfriend. Bradley dropped out of college to focus on their relationship and was working part-time at a local boutique. They lived in a rented apartment in the suburbs and seemed perpetually on the verge of financial crisis. Yet somehow, in my parents' eyes, her life choices were always framed as admirable and adult, while mine were seen as selfish and immature. Despite their reaction, I was proud of what I had accomplished. The condo was mine, paid for by my own efforts, and represented the future I was building for myself, one where my success was measured by my own standards, not by comparison to my sister. Megan met Bradley during her sophomore year of college. He was charming, outgoing, and pursuing a business degree that he swore would lead to entrepreneurial success. Their whirlwind romance progressed at lightning speed, and within 8 months, they were engaged. My parents were ecstatic, immediately throwing themselves into wedding planning, with an enthusiasm I had never seen them direct toward any of my accomplishments. The wedding was an elaborate affair, with over 200 guests, a 5-tier cake, and a honeymoon in Bali that my parents largely financed. I remember standing in my rented tuxedo as the best man giving a speech about love and commitment, while wondering why my sister at 22 was rushing into marriage when she had not even completed her degree. Their hasty timeline did not stop with marriage. 3 months after the wedding, Megan announced she was pregnant. My parents treated this news like the second coming, despite the fact that Megan immediately dropped out of college to prepare for motherhood, and Bradley was still working at his father's car dealership, making commission only sales. "We are starting our family early, so our children can know their grandparents for many years," Megan explained during a family dinner, as if her pregnancy was some sort of gift to our parents, rather than a major life decision with financial implications. With the impending arrival of their first child, Megan and Bradley moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Medford, a suburb outside Boston. The rent stretched their limited income, but Megan insisted they needed the space for the nursery. Bradley had bounced between 3 different jobs within the span of 2 years, never quite finding his footing. He would start each position with grand declarations about how this was the opportunity he had been waiting for, only to quit months later because the company did not recognize his potential. After their daughter Lily was born, Megan took 6 months off and then returned to work part-time at a clothing boutique, where she made just above minimum wage. The job was flexible with her motherhood schedule, which apparently justified the low pay. Between daycare costs, rent, and their car payment for the new SUV, Bradley insisted they needed for safety they were constantly strapped for cash. This is when the requests began. It started small, with Megan calling to ask if I could lend her $200 until payday to cover an unexpected car repair. Then it was $500 for Lily's medical bills when she caught a cold that turned into an ear infection. The loans were never repaid, and over time, they became more frequent and larger in amount. "It is just until Bradley's new business idea takes off," Megan would assure me. Bradley had a new business idea roughly every 3 months, none of which progressed beyond enthusiastic conversations and hastily drawn logos. One evening, my phone rang just as I was leaving the office. It was Megan, her voice tinged with that familiar tone that signaled a request was coming. "Ryan, I hate to ask, but our landlord raised the rent by $300 a month, and we just cannot swing it right now. Could you help us out for a few months until Bradley closes this big deal he is working on?" I sighed already, knowing that the big deal was likely another of Bradley's pipe dreams. "Megan, I have helped you out several times already this year. Maybe it is time to look for a more affordable place." "But moving is so expensive," she countered. "And Lily loves her preschool in this neighborhood. We cannot just uproot her life because of money." The irony of her statement was not lost on me. Megan and Bradley consistently made choices that prioritized short-term comfort over long-term stability, then expected others to help them manage the consequences. During a family dinner at my parents' house the following weekend, Megan spent most of the evening complaining about their cramped apartment. "The closets are tiny, and there is barely enough room for Lily's toys," she lamented while helping herself to a second serving of the roast my mother had prepared. "And the neighbors upstairs are so loud. Lily can hardly nap during the day." My father nodded sympathetically. "It is tough raising a family in an apartment. When your mother and I were starting out, we stretched ourselves thin to buy our first house because we knew you kids needed a yard to play in. Bradley and I want that too, Megan said, casting a sideways glance at me. But the housing market is impossible these days. Not all of us can afford fancy condos in Back Bay. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that I had spent years saving, while Megan and Bradley seemed allergic to the concept of delayed gratification. Well, you two are doing the best you can, my mother assured her. Building a family is the most important job there is. Everything else is secondary. My father nodded in agreement, adding, "Sometimes I think your brother has it too easy. No responsibilities except to himself. When you have a family, that is when you really understand what matters in life." I stared down at my plate, feeling the familiar sting of their dismissal. In their eyes, my career success, financial discipline, and home ownership paled in comparison to Megan's status as a parent, regardless of the financial chaos that surrounded her choices. As dinner concluded, Megan announced that she and Bradley were trying for a second child. My parents erupted in excitement, completely ignoring the fact that Megan and Bradley could barely afford the child they already had. "That is wonderful news," my mother gushed. "Lily needs a sibling. Children should never grow up alone." The subtle dig at my single status was clear. In my family's hierarchy of accomplishments, my advanced degree, career success, and financial independence were irrelevant because I had not produced grandchildren. Driving home that night, I found myself gripping the steering wheel tightly, frustration building in my chest. No matter what I achieved, it would never be enough in my parents' eyes, because I had failed to follow the script they had written for their children's lives. Megan was the golden child simply for reproducing, while I was somehow less valuable as a human being because I had chosen to build my career and financial security first. Little did I know that this dinner was just the prelude to an even more outrageous display of entitlement that would soon follow. 3 weeks after that uncomfortable family dinner, I decided to invite my parents over to my condo. Despite their obvious favoritism toward Megan, I still held on to the hope that I could somehow earn their approval, or at least their respect. I planned to cook them a special meal in my gourmet kitchen, one of the features of my condo that I took particular pride in. I spent the entire day preparing. I went to the farmer's market in the morning to select the freshest ingredients, then stopped by a boutique wine shop to pick up a bottle of Cabernet that the owner assured me would pair perfectly with the beef tenderloin I planned to serve. I spent hours cleaning the already tidy condo, arranging fresh flowers on the dining table, and meticulously setting out the good china I had splurged on after my last promotion. By 6:30 in the evening, everything was perfect. The beef was resting, the roasted vegetables were staying warm in the oven, and the chocolate soufflés were ready to go in as soon as we finished the main course. When the doorbell rang at 6:45, I felt a surge of nervous anticipation. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they would finally see that I had built something worthy of their pride. My mother entered first, offering a quick cheek kiss, before immediately commenting on the building's lack of covered parking. My father followed with a firm handshake and a cursory glance around the space. "Something smells good," he remarked, which I chose to take as a compliment. I gave them a tour of the condo, pointing out the custom bookshelves I had installed and the view of the city skyline from my bedroom window. Their responses were polite but distracted. My mother kept checking her phone, while my father seemed more interested in asking about the condo fees and property taxes than in sharing my enthusiasm for the home I had worked so hard to obtain. We sat down to dinner, and I poured the wine, hoping the meal would help relax the strangely tense atmosphere. My parents exchanged glances several times, seeming to have a silent conversation I was not privy to. Finally, as I was serving the main course, my mother cleared her throat. "Ryan, this is all very nice," she began in a tone that instantly put me on alert. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think it is time to discuss something important." I set down the serving platter and took my seat, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "You know that Megan and Bradley have been struggling with their housing situation," my father continued, cutting a piece of the tenderloin without looking up. "That apartment of theirs is no place to raise a family, especially with another baby potentially on the way." I nodded cautiously, unsure where this was heading, but already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "Well," my mother picked up, "we were thinking about how you have all this space here." She gestured around the dining room with her fork. This condo has 2 bedrooms and it is just you living here. Meanwhile, Megan and Bradley and little Lily are crammed into that tiny apartment with paper-thin walls and no yard. The knot in my stomach tightened. What exactly are you suggesting? My father set down his cutlery and looked me directly in the eye. We think you should help out your family. Let Megan and Bradley and Lily move in here. This would be perfect for them, especially with the good school district. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. You want me to give them my condo, the one I spent years saving for, and just finished renovating to my specifications? Not give necessarily, my mother said quickly, though her tone suggested that was exactly what they had in mind. Maybe you could move to a smaller place, something more appropriate for a single person. After all, you are just one man while they are a growing family. I felt a surge of disbelief so strong it momentarily robbed me of speech. When I finally found my voice, it came out quieter than I intended. This is my home. I worked for years to afford it. Why would I give it up? My mother's expression hardened slightly. Because they are family, Ryan. Family helps family. Megan is building something important with Bradley, creating the next generation. You are just. She paused, searching for words. Just what? I prompted, my voice now tight with anger. Just a single man who may never have kids, my father finished bluntly. What do you need all this space for? To impress dates? To host dinner parties for your single friends? Megan and Bradley have real needs. They are building a legacy. The tenderloin I had so carefully prepared now sat like lead in my stomach. I could not believe what I was hearing. In their eyes, my life, my achievements, my very home were all dispensable because I had not followed their prescribed path of marriage and reproduction. Let me make sure I understand this, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. You think that because Megan chose to have a child with a man who cannot hold down a job, and because they made no effort to save for adequate housing before doing so, I should give up the home that I worked and saved for years to afford? That is an ugly way to put it, my mother snapped. Bradley is trying his best. Not everyone can have the advantages you have had. I nearly choked on my wine. Advantages. What advantages? The scholarship I earned through my own hard work. The job I got through my own merits. The money I saved by living frugally for years, while Megan and Bradley bought new cars and took luxury vacations they could not afford. Now you are just being selfish, my father said. Family takes care of family. Your sister needs this place more than you do. And what about what I need? I countered. What about the fact that this is my home, that I earned it, that I love living here? My mother waved her hand dismissively. You can find another place. For Megan, this is about providing stability for her child. For you, it is just about convenience. The conversation spiraled further as I tried to make them understand the absurdity of their request. But they were unmoved, firmly convinced that my sister's reproductive choices somehow entitled her to the fruits of my labor. Then my father dropped the real bombshell. We have already mentioned to Megan that your place would be perfect for them, he said casually, as if this were a perfectly reasonable thing to have done. She and Bradley are very excited about the possibility. I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. You told them they could have my condo before even discussing it with me. My mother had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. We just mentioned it as a possibility, but they are already thinking about how they would arrange Lily's room and the nursery for the new baby. There is no new baby yet, I pointed out, and there will be no arrangement of rooms in my home because I am not going anywhere. Do not be so rigid, Ryan, my father said sternly. This is what family does. Your mother and I made sacrifices for you and your sister. Now it is your turn to do the same. I have made plenty of sacrifices, I replied, my voice rising. I worked through college. I lived with roommates in a tiny apartment for years to save money. I brought lunch from home every day and skipped vacations. I earned this place, and now you want me to just hand it over because Megan and Bradley cannot be bothered to make similar sacrifices. That is enough, my father said, standing up. I can see you are not going to be reasonable about this, but think about it, Ryan. Think about what really matters in life. Is it this fancy condo, or is it family? This conversation is over, I said, also standing. I think you should leave. My mother looked shocked. You are asking us to leave? In the middle of dinner? Yes, I replied firmly. You have made it clear that you do not respect me, my home, or the work I put into acquiring it. I am not comfortable continuing this evening. They left in a huff of righteous indignation, my mother muttering about my selfishness, and my father shaking his head in disappointment. As the door closed behind them, I stood in the sudden silence of my beautiful condo, the meal I had so carefully prepared, abandoned on the dining table. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. My own parents had essentially told me that my life, my choices, and my achievements meant less than my sister's because she had reproduced and I had not. They had valued me, not as an individual with my own goals and dreams, but merely as a resource to be tapped for the benefit of the child they actually valued. In that moment, something broke inside me. A lifetime of trying to earn their approval suddenly seemed like a fool's errand. They would never see me as equal to Megan, no matter what I achieved. And now they expected me to give up my home, the physical manifestation of years of hard work and sacrifice, because, in their eyes, I did not deserve it as much as my sister did. I spent that night alone in my condo, looking at the spaces I had so carefully designed and furnished, the home I had created for myself. And I began to form a plan. The morning after my parents left, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. For too long, I had been seeking approval from people who would never give it, trying to earn respect from those who fundamentally did not value my life choices. It was time to break that cycle. I called Travis first thing, needing to share the unbelievable conversation with someone who would understand its true absurdity. They said, "What?" Travis exclaimed, after I recounted the previous evening's events. "They actually expected you to give up your condo to your sister because she has a kid, and you do not." Not just expected, I clarified. They had already told her she could have it. They came here to inform me of their decision, not to ask for my input. That is the most entitled thing I have ever heard. Travis said, his voice rising with indignation on my behalf. "Please tell me you told them to go to hell." "I asked them to leave," I replied. "But now I am trying to figure out what to do next. They are not going to drop this. They will keep pressuring me, making me out to be the villain for not sacrificing my home on the altar of my sister's poor planning." "So, what are you thinking?" Travis asked. I hesitated, then voiced the idea that had been forming since the night before. "I am thinking about selling the condo." "What? But you love that place. You worked so hard for it." "I do love it," I acknowledged. "But now it is tainted. Every time I walk through the door, I will remember that my family sees it as rightfully Megan's, not mine. Besides, if I sell it, there will be nothing for them to try to take from me." There was a pause on the line. "That is actually kind of brilliant," Travis finally said. "Nuclear option, but brilliant. They cannot pressure you to give Megan something you no longer own." That afternoon, I contacted Diana Chen, a real estate agent who had helped a colleague sell his property the previous year. I explained that I needed to sell quickly and quietly without word getting back to my family. "That is an unusual request," Diana remarked during our initial meeting at a coffee shop several blocks from my condo. "Most sellers want to spread the word as widely as possible. This is a special circumstance," I explained, not wanting to get into the family drama. "I need discretion more than I need to maximize the sale price, though obviously I do not want to take a loss." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "The market in Back Bay is very strong right now. Your renovations sound tasteful and high-end. I think we can move this property quickly, even with a limited marketing approach." We agreed that she would bring in only serious, pre-qualified buyers and would not hold open houses that might alert neighbors or family to the sale. She would list the property slightly below market value to ensure a quick sale, but still well above what I had paid 2 years earlier. Within a week, the listing went live on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, we had received 4 offers, all above asking price. The most compelling came from a law firm looking to convert the space into a satellite office for their expanding practice. Not only were they offering 12% above asking price, but they were also willing to close in 30 days with no contingencies. Diana called me with the news. "This is an exceptional offer, Ryan. All cash, no contingencies, quick closing. And since they are converting to office space, they do not even need a lengthy inspection period. We could be done with this in a month." I accepted the offer that same day. The reality of what I was doing hit me as I signed the acceptance paperwork in Diana's office. I was selling my dream home, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to protect myself from my family's outrageous entitlement. "Are you sure about this?" Diana asked, noticing my hesitation as I held the pen over the signature line. "It is a great offer, but you seem conflicted." "I am sure," I said firmly, and signed my name. "This is the right decision." With the sale in process, I needed to find a new place to live. I focused my search on neighborhoods my family rarely visited, eventually finding a modern one-bedroom apartment in a high-rise in Seaport. The building had excellent security, including a doorman and key fob access, which suddenly seemed like important features given my family situation. The rent was steep, but with the proceeds from the condo sale, I could afford it easily, and the building's amenities, including a gym rooftop deck and co-working space, would compensate somewhat for the reduction in personal space. I signed a 1-year lease and began the process of packing up my condo. Each item I wrapped and boxed represented a decision I had made for myself, a piece of the life I had built through my own efforts. The process was emotional but also cathartic. I was letting go of the physical space, but not of my autonomy or self-respect. Travis helped me move over a single weekend, 2 weeks before the scheduled closing date. We rented a truck and worked from dawn until well past midnight, transferring my life from the historic brick building I had loved to the sleek, modern high-rise that would now be my home. "You know," Travis said, as we collapsed onto my couch in the new apartment surrounded by boxes, "this place has its own charm. Great views, too." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the harbor lights reflecting on the water. "It is not what I planned, but it will do. And the best part is my family has no idea where I am." The closing went smoothly conducted in the offices of the law firm that was purchasing the property. I signed the final paperwork, handed over the keys, and walked out with a cashier's check that represented a significant profit on my 2-year investment. The next day, I deposited most of the money into a diverse portfolio of investments that my financial advisor assured me would be difficult to access quickly, a deliberate choice in case my family tried to pressure me for the proceeds. Throughout this entire process, I maintained radio silence with my parents and Megan. They called and texted multiple times, but I responded only with brief messages saying I was busy with work and would be in touch when my schedule cleared. They had no idea that I had sold the condo and moved across the city. The Sunday after the closing, my parents sent their usual text, inviting me to family dinner. After 2 weeks of dodging their communications, I decided it was time to face them. I responded that I would be there, knowing that the revelation of what I had done would cause an explosion, but feeling secure in the knowledge that I had protected myself from their demands. As I drove to their house that Sunday, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in my adult life, I was not seeking their approval or validation. I was simply going to inform them of a decision I had already made, a decision that was mine alone to make. Whatever reaction followed would not change the fact that the condo was gone, sold to buyers who were already renovating it into office space. There was nothing my family could do about it now, and that knowledge gave me a sense of power I had never felt in their presence before. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 5 o'clock, the designated time for our family Sunday dinners. The familiar suburban colonial looked the same as always, with my mother's carefully tended flower beds flanking the front walkway and my father's immaculately maintained lawn stretching to the white picket fence that bordered the Dewsley property. It was a scene of perfect domestic harmony, belying the emotional manipulation that often occurred within those walls. My mother answered the door, her initial smile fading quickly into a look of mild reproach. "We were beginning to think you were not coming. You have been so hard to reach lately." I said I would be here. I replied neutrally, stepping inside and handing her the bottle of wine. I had brought a significantly less expensive selection than what I had served at my ill-fated dinner party. "Your father is in the living room," she said, accepting the wine without comment. "Megan and Bradley are running late as usual. Something about Lily being fussy." I found my father in his favorite armchair, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he scrolled through something on his tablet. He looked up as I entered, offering a nod that was neither warm nor particularly cold. Good to see you, son, he said, setting the tablet aside. Been busy with work. Something like that, I replied, taking a seat on the couch across from him. How have you been? We engaged in stilted small talk for the next 20 minutes, carefully avoiding any mention of our last encounter or the outrageous request they had made. My mother bustled in and out of the room checking on dinner preparations and making occasional contributions to the conversation, but the tension in the air was palpable. Finally, the doorbell rang announcing Megan and Bradley's arrival. They entered the living room with Lily in tow, my niece, immediately running to my father for the candy he always kept in his pocket for her. Megan looked pleased with herself, exchanging a meaningful glance with my mother that made my stomach tighten. Bradley strutted in with the unearned confidence that had always irritated me, clapping me on the shoulder with excessive force. Ryan, my man, long time no see. How is the big-shot tech guy doing? His voice boomed with false camaraderie. Fine, Bradley. How is the car dealership? I asked, knowing from Travis, who had recently been shopping for a new vehicle, that Bradley was no longer working there. Bradley's smile faltered slightly. Oh, I moved on from that. Limited growth potential. You know I am consulting now. Much better fit for my skill set. Consulting was Bradley's code word for unemployed, but unwilling to admit it. I simply nodded, not bothering to press, for details we all knew did not exist. Dinner was served shortly after a roast chicken, with all the traditional sides that my mother had been making for Sunday dinners since we were children. As we settled around the table, I noticed Megan shooting me speculative glances, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She was planning something, and I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what it was. After grace was said and the food was served, my father cleared his throat. Ryan, your mother and I have been thinking that it is time we had a family discussion about the future, specifically about housing arrangements. Here it comes, I thought, taking a long sip of water to compose myself. We know our conversation at your place did not end well. My mother continued, her tone conciliatory but expectant. But we hope you have had time to think about what we discussed, about how you could help your sister and her family. Megan jumped in, her voice syrupy sweet. We drove by your building yesterday, Ryan. It really is in such a perfect location for Lily's preschool. And the park nearby would be wonderful for her to play in. Bradley nodded enthusiastically. The second bedroom would make a perfect nursery for when the new baby comes along. He patted Megan's still flat stomach meaningfully, though she had not actually announced another pregnancy. My father smiled indulgently at them before turning back to me. So, Ryan, what do you say? Have you given our suggestion some thought? Are you ready to do the right thing for your family? 5 pairs of eyes fixed on me expectantly, including little Lily's, though she was far more interested in avoiding her vegetables than in real estate arrangements. I set down my fork deliberately and looked at each of them in turn. I have given it a lot of thought, I said calmly, and I have made a decision about the condo. Oh, that is wonderful, my mother exclaimed, clearly misinterpreting my statement. Megan, did you hear that Ryan has made a decision? Megan beamed, already mentally redecorating my former home. When can we start moving in? Our lease is up at the end of the month, and we have already given notice. I raised an eyebrow at this. They had terminated their lease before even confirming that they could move into my place. The entitlement was even more staggering than I had realized. That might be difficult, I said, keeping my voice level, considering I sold the condo last week. The silence that followed was absolute. 5 faces froze in various expressions of shock, disbelief, and in Bradley's case, rapidly mounting anger. What my father finally managed, his voice dangerously quiet. I sold it, I repeated clearly. The closing was last Thursday. The new owners are converting it to office space for their law firm. Megan's face crumpled, tears immediately springing to her eyes in the performative display of emotion she had perfected since childhood. But you knew we needed it. How could you sell it without even telling us? The same way you felt entitled to it without even asking me, I replied evenly. It was my property to do with as I pleased. I decided to sell it. This is unbelievable. My father thundered, his face reddening. After everything we discussed, after we made it clear how important this was for your sister's family, you went behind our backs and sold the place. I did not go behind anyone's backs, I countered. I made a decision about my own property, which is my right. I did not owe anyone a consultation. My mother was shaking her head in disbelief. But where will Megan and Bradley and Lily live now? They have already given notice on their apartment. That sounds like a problem they created for themselves, I said. Perhaps they should have confirmed the new housing arrangement before terminating their current one. Bradley pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. You selfish bastard. You knew we were counting on that condo. Where did the money go? You at least owe us the proceeds so we can find another place. I stared at him momentarily, speechless at the audacity. I do not owe you anything, Bradley. Not my condo. Not the money from its sale. Not a single penny. That was my investment paid for, with my money earned through my work. But we are family. Megan wailed loud enough to startle Lily, who began to whimper in confusion. Family is supposed to help family. Family is also supposed to respect boundaries, I replied. Family is supposed to celebrate each other's achievements, not try to appropriate them. None of you respected the work I put into buying that place. None of you valued what it meant to me. You only saw something you wanted and felt entitled to take. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. Where is the money, Ryan? What have you done with it? I invested it, I said simply. In a diversified portfolio with significant withdrawal penalties if accessed within the next 5 years. This was not entirely true, but it was close enough, and I wanted to make it clear that the money was not available for their taking. You have always been selfish, my mother said, her voice trembling with emotion that seemed genuine if misplaced. Always thinking only of yourself. But I never thought you would stoop this low, leaving your own sister without a home for her family. Megan and Bradley are adults, I said firmly. Their housing situation is their responsibility, not mine. If they cannot afford suitable accommodations, perhaps they should reconsider their spending habits. Or Bradley could try keeping a job for more than 6 months at a time. Bradley lunged across the table at me, but my father caught his arm. Not now, son, he said to Bradley, the term of endearment not lost on me. This is not the way to handle this. Megan was now sobbing, openly clutching Lily to her chest, as if I had somehow threatened her child, rather than simply declining to give them my home. What are we going to do? She cried. We have nowhere to go. You could stay with Mom and Dad, I suggested reasonably. They have plenty of space, and they seem very invested in helping you with your housing situation. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were happy to volunteer my property, but clearly less enthusiastic about offering their own. That is not a long-term solution, my father said stiffly. This house is not set up for a young family. Neither was my condo, I pointed out. Yet you all decided it would be perfect for them. This is different, my mother insisted, though she did not elaborate on how. Well, I am afraid I cannot help you, I said, standing up. The condo is sold, the money is invested, and I have a new place to live, where I plan to enjoy my single, childless existence in peace. Where are you living now? Megan demanded through her tears. You have to at least help us find a new place. I do not have to do anything, I replied, and I would prefer to keep my new address private given the circumstances. You cannot just walk away from your family obligations, my father shouted as I moved toward the door. I paused and turned back to face them all, still seated around the dinner table in various states of shock and outrage. I have no obligation to give any of you my property or my money. The sooner you accept that, the better off we will all be. I left to a chorus of protests and accusations, closing the door firmly behind me. As I walked to my car, my phone began buzzing with texts and calls from my parents and Megan. I silenced it and drove back to my new apartment, feeling oddly light despite the confrontation. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood my ground against their manipulations and entitlement. It felt liberating, even as I recognized that the fallout was likely just beginning. For the next week, I maintained a strict policy of non-engagement with my family. I blocked their numbers on my phone, set up email filters to direct their messages to a folder I would check when I felt emotionally prepared, and made sure my new building's security staff was aware that I was not accepting unannounced visitors. Travis checked in daily, concerned about the potential escalation. Your sister sounds unhinged, he commented, after I shared the details of the family dinner confrontation. Do you think they will actually try anything? What can they do? I replied. The condo is sold. The money is legally mine. They have no claim to any of it. As it turned out, I underestimated their determination and sense of entitlement. 8 days after the family dinner, I received a text from a number I did not recognize. This is Bradley. We know where you live. We are coming over to talk about what you owe us. Be there, or we go to your work next. The threat sent a chill down my spine. I had been careful not to reveal my new address, but Boston was a small city in many ways. Perhaps they had followed me, or maybe someone from my office had inadvertently mentioned my move. I immediately called building security and informed them of the potential situation. The head of security, a retired police officer named Marcus, assured me they would not allow anyone up without my explicit permission. Sure enough, 2 hours later, I received a call from the front desk. Mr. Wilson, there is a couple here insisting they need to see you, a Bradley and Megan Harris. They seem quite agitated. I am not accepting visitors. I replied firmly. Please ask them to leave. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was the lobby security desk. Sir, they are refusing to leave and causing a scene. The gentleman is threatening to camp out in the lobby until you come down. Then please call the police, I said. They are trespassing. Through the security camera feed available on my television, I watched as 2 police officers arrived and escorted a protesting Megan and Bradley from the building. Megan was crying loudly while Bradley was gesturing angrily, clearly trying to convince the officers of the righteousness of their cause. The officers remained unmoved, and eventually they departed. The next morning, I received another text from Bradley. You think you are so smart getting us kicked out, but you cannot hide forever. Your family needs that money, and we are going to get what we deserve. I forwarded the message to my company's legal counsel, asking for advice. James Harrington, our head of legal, called me within the hour. This is bordering on harassment, he said after I explained the situation. Have you considered getting a restraining order? I was hoping it would not come to that, I admitted. They are still family despite everything. Family or not, their behavior is inappropriate and potentially threatening, James replied. Document everything, save all messages, and do not engage directly with them. If they show up at the office, security will handle it. 3 days later, a courier arrived at my office with an envelope. Inside was a formal legal notice, informing me that I was being sued by Megan and Bradley Harris for breach of verbal contract, unjust enrichment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were seeking damages equal to the full value of my sold condo, plus additional compensation for their pain and suffering. I stared at the document in disbelief. There had never been any contract, verbal or otherwise. I had never promised them anything. The audacity of the claim was staggering. I immediately took the papers to James, who reviewed them with a deep frown. This is frivolous, he said, after reading through the complaint. But that does not mean it will not cause you headaches. You need a personal attorney for this, not corporate counsel. I can recommend someone excellent. That afternoon, I met with Jessica Daniels, an attorney who specialized in family property disputes. She reviewed the lawsuit documents carefully, occasionally shaking her head or making notes. Let me be clear, she said when she had finished reading. There is no legal merit to this case whatsoever. You owned the property outright. You never promised it to them in any documented way. You were under no obligation to house your sister's family. This is a nuisance suit designed to pressure you into settling just to make it go away. So, what do we do? I asked. We fight it, Jessica said firmly. We file for immediate dismissal on the grounds that there is no valid claim, and we countersue for legal fees and harassment. Will that work? She shrugged. The dismissal should be granted. The countersuit is more of a strategic move to show them we are serious. The more concerning aspect is this. She held up an affidavit signed by my parents claiming that I had verbally agreed to provide housing for Megan and her family. My parents lied, I said, feeling a fresh wave of betrayal. I never agreed to any such thing. In fact, I explicitly refused. Unfortunately, it is your word against theirs, Jessica pointed out. But the burden of proof is on them, and verbal contracts regarding real estate, generally, are not enforceable anyway under the statute of frauds. Still be prepared for this to get ugly. Family lawsuits often do. The following weeks were some of the most stressful of my life. My parents began calling my colleagues, telling them I had abandoned my family in their time of need. Megan showed up at a client meeting 8 months pregnant. Apparently she had been pregnant during our confrontation, though barely showing tearfully, claiming I had left her homeless in her condition. Security had to escort her out, creating an uncomfortable situation I had to explain to confused clients. My parents even went so far as to contact my extended family, spinning a tale of my cruelty and selfishness that resulted in concerned calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins I rarely spoke with. The narrative they created bore little resemblance to reality, but it was convincing enough to those who did not know the full story. The emotional toll was significant. I had always known my place in the family hierarchy, but I had never expected them to resort to legal action and public humiliation in their effort to control me. The betrayal cut deep, making me question every family memory, every interaction, every moment. I had convinced myself they cared about me as much as they cared about Megan. Through it all, Travis remained steadfast in his support. "They are showing their true colors," he said, during one particularly difficult evening when I was questioning my decision to fight back. "This was never about housing. It was about control. They expected you to fall in line, and you refused." My colleagues at Vertex were surprisingly supportive as well. My boss, Daniel, called me into his office after Megan's scene at the client meeting. "Ryan, I want you to know that the company stands behind you," he said. "Your work has always been exceptional, and your personal life is your business. Take whatever time you need to deal with this situation." Even in the midst of the stress and betrayal, I found myself surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide to others. It was a stark contrast to the conditional love I had grown up with, and it helped me stay resolute in my position. The case dragged on for 2 months before finally reaching a preliminary hearing. Jessica was confident that the judge would dismiss the suit, but warned me that my family might attempt to create a scene in the courtroom. "Remember, stay calm no matter what they say or do," she advised as we walked into the courthouse. "The judge will be looking at behavior as well as legal arguments." My parents, Megan and Bradley, were already seated when we entered, all wearing expressions of righteous indignation. Megan, now visibly pregnant, had positioned herself to be clearly visible to the judge, a calculated move that Jessica had warned me about. The hearing proceeded largely as Jessica had predicted. The judge, an older woman, named Judge Harmon, with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, listened to both sides with an increasingly skeptical expression. "Let me make sure I understand the plaintiff's claim," she said after Bradley and Megan's attorney had presented their case. "You assert that the defendant verbally promised to give you his condominium worth over $800,000, with no written agreement, no consideration offered in return, and no documentation of any kind beyond these affidavits from interested parties, who are also the defendant's parents." "Yes, Your Honor," their attorney replied, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "But there was a moral obligation based on family needs and the defendant's more fortunate financial position." "Counselor, this court deals in legal obligations, not moral ones," Judge Harmon replied dryly. "Miss Daniels, your response." Jessica presented our case, succinctly emphasizing that there had never been any agreement that the property had been purchased solely with my funds and that I had complete legal right to sell it as I saw fit. Judge Harmon took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. "This court finds no valid legal claim in this matter. The plaintiff has failed to establish the existence of any enforceable contract or obligation. The defendant had full legal right to sell his property. This case is dismissed with prejudice." She paused, looking sternly at Megan and Bradley. "Furthermore, the court finds this lawsuit to be frivolous and potentially vexatious. The plaintiffs and their counsel are ordered to pay the defendant's reasonable legal costs associated with this matter. This court does not look kindly on attempts to use the legal system to enforce entitled expectations against family members who have committed no wrong." As we left the courtroom, my mother attempted to approach me, her expression a mixture of anger and pleading. "Ryan, please, can we talk about this? Surely there is a way to help your sister without all this legal nonsense. There is nothing to discuss, I replied, continuing toward the exit. The court has made its decision. I suggest you all accept it and move on. This is not over. Bradley called after me, his face flushed with anger. Family does not treat family this way. I turned back briefly. You are right about one thing, Bradley. Family should not treat family the way you all have treated me. With that, I walked out of the courthouse, feeling the weight of months of stress and anxiety beginning to lift. The legal battle was over, but I knew the family wounds would take much longer to heal if they ever did at all. In the weeks following the court's dismissal of the lawsuit, I experienced a strange mixture of relief, vindication, and grief. While I had won the legal battle decisively, the relationship with my family lay in ruins around me. Though I had spent years accepting their conditional love and favoritism toward Megan, having it exposed so blatantly through their willingness to lie in court affidavits was a pain I had not fully prepared for. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received an email from my father. The tone was conciliatory, but still failed to acknowledge the fundamental wrong they had committed. Ryan, it began. Your mother and I have been doing some thinking. Perhaps we all got carried away with emotions regarding the condo situation. We still believe family should help family, but we recognize that we could have approached the matter differently. Megan and Bradley have found a small apartment to rent, though it is not ideal for their growing family. We hope you can find it in your heart to reconnect with us. Sunday dinners are not the same without you. I read the email several times, noting what was conspicuously absent. A genuine apology, an acknowledgement that they had no right to demand my property, an admission that signing false affidavits was wrong. Instead, it was a request to return to the status quo, with the unspoken expectation that I would continue to accept my second-class status in the family hierarchy. After careful consideration, I replied, Dad, I appreciate you reaching out. However, I cannot simply pretend that nothing happened. You and Mom not only demanded I give up my home to Megan, but you also lied in legal documents to try to force my compliance when I refused. That level of betrayal cannot be swept under the rug with vague references to emotions getting carried away. I need time and space to consider what kind of relationship, if any, I want to have with the family moving forward. I hope you can respect that. His response was predictably defensive, claiming they had only signed the affidavits because they genuinely believed I had implicitly agreed to help Megan and that my refusal had come as a shock to everyone. It was revisionist history at its finest, but I chose not to engage further. Instead, I began the difficult work of processing what had happened and determining how to move forward. On the recommendation of a colleague who had gone through a similar family estrangement, I began seeing Maria Sanchez, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our weekly sessions quickly became an anchor in my recovery process. What you are experiencing is a form of grief, Maria explained during one of our early sessions. You are mourning the family you thought you had, or the family you wished you had. It is similar to the grief of losing a loved one, except in some ways more complicated, because the people are still there, just not in the role you had hoped for. We explored the patterns of my childhood, the subtle and not so subtle ways my parents had prioritized Megan's needs and wants over mine, and how that had shaped my perpetual quest for their approval. You were set up to fail, Maria observed. They established a game where the rules kept changing, but the outcome was predetermined. Megan would always win their approval because that was what they had decided, regardless of what either of you actually did. So why did I keep trying? I asked. Because they are your parents, she replied simply. Children naturally seek parental approval and love. It is one of our most basic instincts. The tragedy is when parents exploit that need, rather than meeting it unconditionally. Through these sessions, I began to understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own limitations, not my worth. Their inability to value my choices and achievements was about their narrow definition of success, not about any failure on my part. As I worked through these realizations in therapy, I also focused on strengthening the genuine relationships in my life. Travis had been unwavering in his support throughout the ordeal, and our friendship deepened further. I made more effort to connect with colleagues outside of work, accepting invitations I might have previously declined in favor of family obligations. 3 months after the court case, I joined a rock climbing club where I met Nathan, a pediatric surgeon who had also experienced family estrangement after coming out as gay in his 20s. His perspective on creating chosen family was particularly valuable. "Blood relatives are just the people you start with," he told me during a climbing session. "Your real family is built over time through mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care. Sometimes those people are related to you, sometimes they are not. What matters is how they treat you and how you treat them." 6 months after the lawsuit dismissal, I received a text from Megan announcing the birth of her second child, a boy named James. The message included a photo and an invitation to come meet my new nephew. There was no mention of the lawsuit, the condo, or any of the events of the past year. It was as if she expected us to simply reset to a superficial relationship where her children gave her automatic access to my time and likely my financial resources. After discussing it with Maria, I sent a polite but brief congratulatory text along with a modest gift card to a baby supply store. I did not commit to a visit or further involvement. It was a boundary that felt appropriate given the circumstances, acknowledging the birth of a family member without pretending the breach of trust had not occurred. My parents continued to reach out periodically, each message carrying the unspoken expectation that I would eventually get over what had happened and return to the family fold on their terms. I maintained minimal civil contact while being clear about my boundaries. It was not the complete estrangement they feared, but neither was it the unquestioning compliance they wanted. 1 year after selling my condo, I used a portion of the investment returns to make a down payment on a new property, a townhouse in Cambridge with a small garden and enough space for a home office. It was different from the Back Bay condo but suited my current needs perfectly. I furnished it carefully, creating a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been trying to be to earn approval that would never come. The housewarming party I hosted was attended by an eclectic group: Travis and his girlfriend Alicia, several colleagues from Vertex, Nathan and his partner, 2 members of my climbing club, and my neighbor Emma, a literature professor who had become a friend. Looking around at these people who accepted me as I was, who valued my thoughts and respected my boundaries, I realized I had indeed built a chosen family. 1. To new beginnings, Travis toasted, raising his glass, and to knowing your own worth. The gathering stretched late into the evening, filled with laughter, good food, and genuine connection. As the last guests departed, I stood in my new home feeling a sense of peace that had eluded me for much of my life. The journey had been painful but necessary. I had learned that standing up for myself was not selfish but essential, that boundaries were not walls but healthy definitions of where I ended and others began. I had also learned that family was not defined by DNA or legal ties, but by mutual respect, support, and love that did not come with conditions or price tags. My parents had taught me through their negative example what real family should not be. And in response, I had found and created what it could be. The path forward would not always be smooth. There would be holidays that brought pangs of loss, moments when I wished for the unconditional parental love I had never truly experienced. But I was no longer defining my success or worth by their narrow metrics. I had broken free of the cycle of seeking approval that would never come, and in doing so, had found something more valuable: self-respect and authentic connections with people who saw and valued me for exactly who I was. As I closed the door on the evening and looked around my new home, I felt a sense of gratitude for the difficult journey that had led me here. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that free us most completely. I had lost a condo and a certain kind of family relationship, but I had gained something far more precious: the knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was, whether or not anyone else ever recognized it. So, what would you do if faced with family members who felt entitled to your hard-earned possessions? Would you have handled it differently than I did? Leave a comment below to share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about setting boundaries and standing up for yourself. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we are born into.